Have you ever wondered why some learning just seems to stick with you whilst other things fade away like yesterday's news? The answer might lie in the learning process itself. In fact, according to theorist David Kolb, we learn best through experience. That's by doing, reflecting, thinking critically, and then doing again. This creates an awesome feedback loop that can produce some spectacular results. Hey everyone, Harry here from Growth Engineering, and today we are going to be discussing David Kolb's experiential learning cycle and his inventory of learning styles. We'll break down each of the 4 stages in the clearest possible terms and provide you with some practical guidance as well. Okay, let's dive in. So, who exactly is David Kolb? Well, he is an American educational theorist who was born in 1939, and he really specializes in the field of experiential learning. He's influenced by the likes of John Dewey, Kurt Lewin, and John Piaget. In fact, I do actually have a video on John Dewey's learning theory if you'd like to check that out as well. Kolb himself is probably best known for his experiential learning theory, which breaks down into 2 key parts. The first is a 4-stage learning cycle, and the second is a set of 4 different learning styles. We'll be exploring both in this video. Okay, so let's get started with Kolb's experiential learning cycle. As we've already seen, experience and learning by doing is at the center of everything in Kolb's theory. In fact, according to Kolb, learners must change or transform something in order to learn. In other words, rote memorization isn't really real learning, as you're not reshaping your understanding as part of that process. So perhaps it's time to ditch those late night cramming sessions. Kolb first introduced his experiential learning cycle back in 1974, but it remains a popular and well-discussed model to this day. It's a continuous loop made up of 4 different stages, including doing, reflecting, thinking critically, and then doing again. Now, it can be a difficult model to embrace and understand fully, as it uses some complex terms to describe some relatively simple ideas. But don't worry, we'll be explaining things as clearly as possible for you. For Kolb, the first stage of learning is concrete experience. This happens when we're directly involved in the learning process, getting our hands dirty. So let's take the example of baking a cake. Concrete experience would be our first attempt at following a recipe, cracking some eggs, mixing the batter, and so on. The second stage of Kolb's experiential learning cycle is then reflective observation. This happens when we take a step back and analyze the experience from our own point of view. So if we take the cake out the oven and we realize that it's failed to rise properly, we'd attempt to understand what went right and what went wrong. Perhaps our measurements were off, for example. The third stage is active conceptualization, which is where we begin to form ideas based on our reflections. For instance, we might decide that we need to turn the temperature of our oven up, or that we should add baking powder into our mixture. The fourth and final stage is active experimentation. This is where we begin to put our ideas into practice in the hope of seeing improved outcomes. Hopefully the result is a delicious cake that doesn't have a soggy bottom. The beauty of Kolb's experiential learning cycle is that it's not linear in any way. You can join in on the fun at any stage you choose. For instance, after reading a recipe, you might decide to jump ahead to abstract conceptualization and start envisioning any tweaks you might want to make. It's also applicable to a wide variety of situations and circumstances. For instance, think about a new skill you're trying to master or a challenge that you're facing at work. Then experience it, reflect on it, come up with new ideas, and try again with these insights in mind. By 1984, Kolb had come to realize that some individuals preferred certain elements of his learning cycle over others. As a result, he created 4 distinct learning styles, each of which is a combination of 2 separate parts of his learning cycle. Let's explore these next. For instance, diverging learners prefer a combination of concrete experience and reflective observation. They prefer to do something and then think about how that felt. On the other hand, assimilating learners prefer a combination of reflective observation and abstract conceptualization. They prefer to watch and then think. Converging learners combine abstract conceptualization with active experimentation. They like their learning to solve real-world problems and challenges. And finally, we have accommodating learners. These learners prefer a combination of active experimentation and concrete experience. They like to get hands-on whenever possible, and they often rely on their intuition over logic. Of course, the idea of learning styles itself is fairly controversial. I do have a full video on this topic if you'd like to learn more. And Kolb's model doesn't really provide us with a holistic account of learning. For instance, it fails to account for the social and cultural context in which learning takes place, and it has very little to say about the role of emotion and motivation in a learning process. Despite this, there's a reason for the theory's popularity. After all, it's very flexible and it's highly engaging. Unlike passive learning methods, Kolb's learning cycle gets you actively involved in the learning process itself, and learning by doing is a powerful thing. Okay, that's it from me today. I hope you've successfully completed this learning cycle. Thank you very much for watching and for reflecting, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.